aquatic habitat. I am recording these meetings for the public to view, and we'll be putting them on a website with all documents. I'm getting that stood up now with a colleague, and we'll hopefully send that link out later this week, but wanted to make sure everyone is aware of that. With that, I think we could move through introductions with the rest of the committee, maybe starting with you, Ryan.
Sure, absolutely. Good morning. My name is Ryan Patch. Work at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets in the Water Quality Division, here on behalf of Secretary Anson Tebbets. Thank you.
Senator Bray.
Sure. So my name is Chris Bray. I chair the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. I live in Bristol and represent the Addison Senate District. So I'm the Senate appointee to the panel. Thank you.
Representative Dolan.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Carrie Dolan, representative from Washington 7th District, which includes Waitsfield, Warren, Fayston, Moortown, and Duxbury. And I'm the House member to this working group. I sit on the House Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife Committee.
Thank you. Jeff Nelson.
Good morning, Jeff Nelson here, principal with VHB. I am representing the ski areas and having done a lot of work over the years on permitting and planning of various water projects in Vermont.
Jason.
My name's Jason Shaddy. I'm the general manager at the Burlington Country Club, representing Golf Course Superintendents Association. I have some experience, previously worked for Vail Resorts Development Company out in Colorado, so some relative experience regarding surface water diversion, working with them, and happy to be involved.
Thank you. John Groveman.
Good morning. I'm John Groveman. I'm the Policy and Water Program Director for the Vermont Natural Resources Council. VNRC is what we go by. We're a statewide environmental group with 4 program areas, including water. And as I said, I'm the Water Program Director in addition to the Policy Director. I was appointed by the House to represent, as one of the representatives representing environmental advocacy groups' interests in this matter. And I've worked on a variety of water quality issues, including flow issues and quantity issues with surface water and groundwater over the last 20 plus years in Vermont.
David.
Good morning. My name is David Dean. I have a lot of former in front of various roles that I've played. Former legislator, former chair of the Natural Resources Committee, former fly fishing guide, former river steward for the Connecticut River Conservancy. Now I represent the House. I was appointed by the Speaker, and my organizational association is Trout Unlimited, and I am president of the Connecticut River Valley chapter of Trout Unlimited.
Thank you. Evan.
Morning, everybody. Evan Fitzgerald, Fitzgerald Environmental. I've been doing hydrology and geomorphology work for about 20 years. In fact, my first boss was Jeff Nelson. Jeff, good to see you. And we do a variety of hydrology, geomorphology work, stormwater, wetlands, a lot of river work. Not as much in the area of withdrawals per se, but have a good fundamental understanding of watershed hydrology. So happy to be part of this committee.
Thank you. Sam?
Hello, I'm Sam Markowski. I'm down in Florence, Vermont. Part of a family business where we do site work and so forth, but also we do organic farming. And I was asked for the task by the Department of Agriculture to represent them during these discussions and be part of this committee. So we do we do growing. Specifically, we grow hemp. And I guess I'm here to represent the farm industry here also.
Okay, thank you. And also joining us today is Mike O'Grady and Matt Chapman. I don't know if Mike, you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure, my name is Mike O'Grady. I'm the Deputy Chief Counsel for the Office of Legislative Counsel at the State House. I've been doing natural resources and water issues for about 15, 16 years now.
And Matt?
Sure, and I'm Matt Chapman. I'm the General Counsel of the Agency of Natural Resources.
Okay, thank you all. I asked if Mike could join us today to, as the first meeting, to review Act 73 as enacted and the charge of the committee. Just give us a basis of what we're tasked with, and then I can give some background and some of the legal framework with Matt. Then we can review study goals, or our goals and objectives and schedule. So Mike, could you start us off with a walkthrough of Act 173?
Sure. How would you like me to do that? Do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, why don't you share your screen? Or I can, might be easier if you share yours.
Okay. All right, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so what you are looking at is Act number 173 from 2020. It was introduced as House Bill H33 by the main lead sponsor was Representative Moore-Wiki, who had some constituents and then some communication with Vermont Law School's Natural Resources Law Clinic about concerns, potential issues regarding surface water diversions in the state and specifically transfers between inter-basins. So this bill was introduced to create the Surface Waters Diversions and Transfer Study Group. You'll see that it is intended to investigate and make recommendations to the General Assembly regarding the environmental, economic, and recreational impacts of surface water diversions, including the transfer of surface water between watersheds. You will see the membership: Secretary of Natural Resources, Secretary of Ag, one member of the Senate Committee on Natural Resources, one member of the House Committee on Natural Resources, 2 persons representing businesses or industry reliant on large quantities of surface water, 2 persons representing the nonprofit environmental advocacy groups, 1 hydrologist, 1 person representing an agriculture or forest products business conducted on working lands. And then you come to the duties of the Surface Water Diversions and Transfer Study Group. First, they're going to develop a baseline inventory of the current and projected quantity, location, and usage of diversions and transfers of surface water in the state. They're then going to recommend whether or not surface water transfers between watersheds should occur. Then they are going to identify whether the state of Vermont should develop and implement a statewide permitting or other regulatory regime for diversions, including the scale or size of a watershed subject to regulation, how a permitting program would comply with the Vermont water quality standards, how or if the permitting program should address the impact of a diversion on groundwater, and how to address reducing the demands for water through water recycling, reuse, and efficiency measures. They are also going to analyze potentially viable regimes to address the use of surface water in Vermont, and if necessary, propose legislative changes to implement the recommendations of the study group, and if necessary, identify any water quality rules, policy, procedures that may require updating to implement the recommendations of the study group. You'll see that the study group has the assistance of the Agency of Natural Resources for administrative, technical, and legal services, and has the assistance of the Office of Legislative Counsel, specifically me, for legal and drafting. There is a report requirement. It's on or before December 15th, 2021. The Surface Water Diversions Transfer Study Group submits a report to the General Assembly, providing its findings and recommendations under subsection C, so the duties that I walked you through. A&R calls the first meeting, which they have done. A&R or designee shall be the chair. I assume that's going to be Jeff. A majority of the membership is a quorum. The group ceases to exist February 1, 2022. And then you get the compensation and reimbursement provisions for those people who are not state employees. Then you get to section 2, which is really about sewage holding tanks. And I don't think you really need to walk through that.
No, thank you, Mike.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mike or Matt over the Act 173 as enacted or the charge? Hearing none. The next thing on our agenda was to I'm going to walk through some background around diversions and transfers in Vermont and the users of the water in Vermont as we know currently. Some of the environmental effects of water withdrawals and diversions on surface waters, and how those environmental effects are mitigated for addressed currently in Vermont. So I'll share my screen.
Jeff, this is Chris Bray. I have a quick question.
Yes.
Are you setting up, or maybe you already have, and I just didn't know where to look exactly, a website for all our materials so that we'll know where the data you're about to show us resides and all the rest?
Yes, I will be setting up a website and we'll send out the link. Currently working with a colleague who is creating the webpage, and we'll be populating it with information from today's meeting and agendas and documents going forward.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. And as I said earlier, the meetings are going to be recorded and posted to that website for the public to review as they wish. Any other questions? All right. I will share my screen. So this is some background on surface water diversions and transfers. What are they? What are different types of surface water diversions? Known Vermont use of surface water currently through withdrawals and diversions, and the environmental effects of these surface water diversions and transfer on Vermont waters and in general. So currently, there's two types of surface water diversions. When I think about it, I think of the consumptive uses of versus the non-consumptive users of surface water. Consumptive users being the water is withdrawn or diverted for a particular use and is not immediately returned to the stream or lake. These typically are what I consider in Vermont would be snowmaking, irrigation for crops or golf courses. They would have a intake like this located on a stream and divert water through a pipe for the particular use, and then the water is basically out of the system. Non-consumptive users are those that divert water but almost return it immediately after use. Those in Vermont typically are hydroelectric projects where you have a dam with an intake. It diverts a subset of that water through a pipe or penstock, generates the power, and returns it to the stream, creating what is known as the bypass reach of river. For inter-basin transfer, just as background, is the transfer of water from one watershed basin to another, typically from a basin with adequate water to one that needs water needed for water demand. These are more common in arid environments, such as the West, United States. But there is one interbasin transfer in Vermont that is part of the Killington-Pico snowmaking system, where water from the Ottaquechee River Basin is transferred over to the Pico side, which is in the Otter Creek, which transfers water from the Connecticut River Basin over to the Lake Champlain Basin. Vermont users of surface water by sector. For the consumptive uses, most of our water withdrawals are for snowmaking. That's about 30% of the known water withdrawals in the state, and 29% are for irrigation purposes for agricultural or residential, well, mostly agricultural irrigation. And then 21% for drinking water. The other sectors make up about 20% are irrigation for golf courses, aquaculture, residential use, which typically includes someone diverting a small amount of water for purpose of either doing their own irrigation for garden or ponds, what have you. Some industrial use, and that's it. For the total known withdrawals in the state for consumptive uses is 106. For the non-consumptive diversions is 104 currently in the state, known currently in the state. Primarily these are for hydroelectric projects, but there is a couple permits for small mills that operate sporadically to divert small amounts of water. Of the sectors that are currently using surface water, snowmaking is the only one that is required to do regular reporting. Currently, this graph shows the past 5 years of water use from snowmaking in millions of gallons. It averages or is around between 1.9 to 2.2 billion gallons of water diverted for snowmaking in the past 5 years, with an average of about 2 billion gallons of water a year diverted. Of course, this will vary based on the amount of natural snow that we receive in a year. No other sector that has reporting requirements consistently. Some do based on permit conditions, report annual use of water to the agency, but there is no consistency across other sectors besides the snowmaking water withdrawals. The environmental effects of water diversions, I think when I think about it, there's direct effects and the indirect effects of these uses of water. The direct effect on a stream would be a reduction in stream flow, which I consider to be really a master variable in stream ecology when you think about it, because that makes up the entire habitat and living area of aquatic organisms. When we reduce the flow, we reduce the depth, the velocities of the stream, the wetted width, which aquatic organisms have adapted to live in. This affects, the amount and quality of the aquatic habitat within a reach. And this picture shows an example of one such area where a water diversion has limited the amount of water actually in a stream below it. The indirect effects on the stream are really related to the quality of the water that remains in the stream. When you're reduced to such a low flow, the water doesn't have the buffering capacity, and the temperatures tend to increase. And if they increase to too much, past thresholds that our native species can tolerate, then you may lose, brook trout in this section of stream or other such fish and aquatic organisms. The other effect is you decrease your dissolved oxygen levels. Warmer water has less ability to hold dissolved oxygen, so you may decrease this to levels where organisms are affected. The environmental effects of inter-basin transfer, effects on the donor stream, or the stream where the water is being taken from, or the basin where the water is being taken from, is a reduction of in stream flow similar to what you just have when you just a normal water withdrawal. You get the water quality effects and the habitat effects, but you also remove that water from that basin in general. So there is an effect on the overall hydrology of the stream or of the basin with the losing that water. The potential effects on the recipient stream or basin could be an introduction to aquatic invasive species that may be transported from the pipeline from the intake to the new basin. Potentially change in water quality, depending if you're providing water from, a subpar water quality stream to one that may be more pristine. The change in the hydrologic regime of the receiving basin, you're adding more water to that basin, which can have an effect. And potentially an alteration of physical habitat by the addition of the water to that stream or to that basin. So currently, the way that in Vermont and many states have chosen to mitigate some of these effects, basically more talking here about a specific water withdrawal on one body and not the transfer of water, but is to implement a conservation flow requirement. This is the quantity of water required to be within the stream before water can be withdrawn. And water, when flow is below this level, no water can be diverted. So here is an example of the seasonal conservation flows that we adopt in Vermont, where you have 3 seasons of summer, fall, winter, and spring conservation flows. And water withdrawals could take place when the flow here, this is from the Mad River in central Vermont. When flow in the river is above this conservation flow value, water could be diverted. So that is how we deal with these issues currently in Vermont. And I think with that, I can take some questions if people have.
I don't.
Jeff, this is David Dean.
Yeah.
That last slide that you showed, when would that conservation flow even be reviewed? Under what type of application or what type of action would that review even take place?
Yeah, so that review would take place typically now around large water withdrawals that trigger permit conditions or Section 401 water quality certifications. So hydroelectric or, someone installing a large intake. I'm going to get a little bit more into that, David, later. Coming up when Matt and I review some of the existing regulations around Streamflow.
Okay, I'll listen for my answer then.
Okay, and if you don't hear it, obviously speak up. Senator Bray. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, it cut in and out. Were you asking me a question?
No, you have your hand raised.
Oh, well, that's an operator error on my part.
John?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So do you have, you talked about known withdrawals. I mean, I know this is kind of a weird way to ask this question, but what do you think is out there that you don't know about? I mean, do you have any sense of the universe of activities that are occurring that, the agency hears about sometimes, or, the gaps that you have reason to believe exists? Or is that part of our charge to really, as you know, to dig into that as a committee and get a better understanding of the withdrawals?
I think it's really part of the charge of the committee. I have a sense of what water withdrawals are not, we don't know about. Not a number, but the type. Typically, these would be small water withdrawals where someone takes a pump and puts their hose in the stream and withdraws water. I think the larger users of the water, I think there's a better handle on those withdrawals, and they're obviously more regulated by the agency.
Could we, as part of the information on the website that you put together, just pull together the withdrawals that do report, and just even links to like where we could get that information, so we could see even what, like, within the sectors, what are the thresholds, what's covered and what's not covered.
Yeah. So as part of my work with the Streamflow section, we have a web-based, and I'll put this link up there, but it's a web-based map that basically includes all the known water withdrawals and diversions in the state. So this data is coming from that online tool.
That's great. Thank you.
Jeff?
Thanks, Jeff. So my question, somewhat related, has to do with the inventory information that you presented. And I guess I'm trying to understand, as you mentioned, the ski areas and snowmaking are one of the only sectors that's required to provide very complete and comprehensive reporting of their water usage. So I guess I'm kind of wondering how you developed this inventory information specifically for other sectors, and how accurate you think it is, because if no one's reporting, how do you know how much they're using?
Yeah, these numbers were the number of known water withdrawals, Jeff,
Okay.
at least in the pie chart. Those numbers, those we really don't have a good handle on how much water those other sectors are using. We have a handful of permits for other Act 250 water withdrawals, some Section 401 water quality certifications for diversions outside snowmaking, and then we have a list of users that come in and request a de minimis amount of water, which are authorized.
Okay, but so part of what you see as the task ahead of us is to develop a better understanding of those quantities.
Yes.
Okay. Fair enough. I did have another question, but I can hold it and let some other folks go.
Okay. I'll come back.
Yeah.
Jason?
Yeah, so my question was sort of in line with both John and Jeff's, and that was I guess the definition of surface waters as applicable to this sort of activity, and the threshold of withdrawal in which it would trigger the review. It seems that the ski areas are in particular being required to report, probably based on their overall consumption, but there are, I would imagine, other entities in the state which combined together could possibly be applicable in this scenario. And my second sort of question was, I guess particularly as it applies to the agriculture, ski area, and golf course industry, there's certainly a withdrawal component, but there's also a return component. And, in Colorado, our experience was there was a withdrawal reporting. There was also a credit reporting based on retention or release, specifically during times as demonstrated with the conservation flow threshold. Agriculture is and golf courses may be withdrawing, but returning to groundwater, not necessarily surface water. So I think it's important when we consider the withdrawal component, we also consider the credit or return component when evaluating adverse effect.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think one of the charge of the committee was looking at, that potential return to groundwater. Thank you. Who's next here? Ryan?
Thanks, Jeff. My question is related to the information that the state is aware of with regards to number of withdrawals and perhaps total volume, and how that may intersect or inform or be related to some of the U.S. Geological Survey estimations and reports they put out with regards to Vermont's surface and groundwater withdrawals. In reviewing, recommendations for future experts or testimony per the agenda. That was some information I stumbled upon, and so I was curious if you had any comment to share about that.
Yeah, so much of the information on surface water use that the USGS gets is provided by our program to do that report. We've worked with them to come up with a water use database where we can populate what use is being used in the Vermont, and now it goes online and they can just basically pull that information for their reports.
Thanks.
Carrie?
That's helpful.
Thanks. Representative Dolan?
Yes, thank you. And perhaps you've answered one part of my question, but it was, I think, related to something that both Jeff and John had mentioned regarding the compounding effect. If we're only tracking one type of water diversion, water use, and yet there may be other water withdrawals, there is a compounding effect in terms of trying to maintain a minimal or seasonal flow. So I want to just flag that. I think all of us share that one area of concern, so that not the full burden of maintaining that seasonal flow falls on any one industry. And the second part related to the example you showed in my own district, in the Mad River Valley, where it showed that kind of relationship between conservation flow and when and the timing of water diversion. And my question is, and perhaps this will be a topic of further conversation in terms of whether that red line truly reflects a seasonal flow so as to minimize or maintain the channel forming characteristics of the stream. And then the final question is about ongoing monitoring to make sure that we're maintaining the minimum stream flows for the functions of the streams, and how the state goes about monitoring either 7Q10 or that seasonal minimum conservation flow. So
Yeah,
unlike Jeff, I threw all three questions in one breath.
Yeah, there's a lot there. So I think if get back to the question about the conservation flows, is if it's would be a static flow level with those, depending on the amount of water being diverted, you would obviously still see those high flow events that may be channel forming, as most of our diversions are not diverting that high amount of water. But we can further unpack that later as we move through this process. The monitoring, were you talking the monitoring of the water withdrawals being, or
No.
the USGS gauges?
No, monitoring the actual. Yep.
Yeah, so the US, the currently Vermont is in a cooperative agreement with the USGS to operate, I think, like 25 to 30 real-time USGS gauges around the state. So that is the current information of how, we understand the overall flow, water availability within the state by regions. Those gauges tend to be focused, though, on the larger basins and not as much on smaller watersheds where we may have, less than 10 square mile of fluid, of 10 square mile stream, which likely are obviously the more dominant in Vermont landscape and maybe provide more information on what the overall hydrology is in the state by region. Is there another question, Carrie?
That last question was about the compounding effect if we're only tracking one,
Right.
or having requirements for one user, and yet multiple diversions may result in, I think, the outcomes that we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, and I think the cumulative effects of these across the landscape is a concern, and having a better understanding of what is out there in the landscape would address that issue. So you're right, so that there's not one user being more regulated than the other that is responsible for maintaining those flows. So it's right now, I think we understand that the cumulative effects are real and a concern, but at this point, having a clear understanding of the water use across the state has to, I think, be the first goal of addressing those impacts or potential impacts. Senator Bray?
Thank you. The question, I think, when the bill came through the Senate, one of the things, I think there were very few changes, but one was related to groundwater. And I don't know if you have it scheduled. I don't know enough about it, but the concern was to what degree were other water withdrawals potentially either impacting streams in a positive or negative way as water moved around between the two surface and groundwater systems. And I'm not a hydrologist, so I don't know if this is our sort of de minimis impacts or it's a significant thing, but we were trying to think about it holistically. And so that's why we had added that concern. Is that something that we'll spend some time on later as we work through this, on this panel in coming months?
Yes, I believe we will, Senator Bray. That will be one of the duties, deliverables that we need to address. I think by the time we leave this meeting today, I would like to generate a list of topic ideas and agendas for future meetings. Sort of one of the last tasks we have on today's agenda. And I think, that maybe trying to get someone in to talk about that, or someone from the panel to talk about those groundwater, surface water interactions and potential impacts should be on future agenda.
Okay. Thank you.
John?
Oh, no, I think my hand wasn't up. It might have been left over from.
Okay.
I'll lower my hand. Sorry about that.
Jason?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I I think Carrie brings up a good point. If we target industry versus targeting a particular basin or stream as far as evaluation, I think that compounding effect or multiple withdrawals certainly should be considered, particularly in the snowmaking industry. I mean, they could also be the biggest withdrawal, but also provide the most positive return to a stream during a time in which it may dip below the conservation flow. So I think looking at an industry is sort of not inclusive of the full impact to the watershed. Has anybody looked at what other states are doing as far as programming and other programs that are in place? I think that may be helpful to guide some of the definitions of, you know, what withdrawal qualifies, what surface water would qualify. I was just curious if that's been looked at.
I have looked at what some other states are doing, and I think, you know, maybe that would be a good topic coming for us to cover at a later meeting. You know, New England states do it slightly different all across, and you know, maybe that'd be a good review for the committee, just to dive into that and what that looks like. Jeff?
Thanks. A couple of things. You know, Jason brought up the comment about return flows, and certainly in the context of snowmaking, the water use is not ultimately consumptive because the snow melts and it percolates into the local groundwater and makes it back out into the surface water system. I think there hasn't been, to my knowledge, any study of that in the East. I know that a number of years ago in Colorado, there was some work that was done to look at kind of how much of the water ultimately would be expected to make it back and what the timing of that may be. You know, I don't know. You know, that may be something that we want to at least look at a bit and maybe refresh that research, see what's out there that might be more recent in terms of an understanding of the return of that water. And then, you know, sort of a question, and I don't know if Mike O'Grady is still here or not, but you know, when you gave the illustration, Jeff, of the consumptive and non-consumptive uses, the example of non-consumptive was, you know, typical hydroelectric facility. And I guess my question is, do we understand the charge of this group to be looking at hydro operations? Because I know there's no one here representing the hydro operators. I see Matt Chapman saying, right. No. I didn't think so either, but I just wanted to ask the question because of that illustration that Jeff gave.
Yeah, and that was largely to recognize that there's two types of use, and you're saying diversion. You know, I would prefer, I guess, to use withdrawal. But you know, if you're considering all diversions, you know, hydro would be a diversion. I didn't want to leave that out, but no, I do not believe that this looking at hydro is within the context of this group. Matt, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think ultimately, if you look at the charge is focused on, I think it's worth sort of establishing a baseline of what's out there, but the charge is really looking at what part of the universe is out there, but not currently addressed or managed by the Agency of Natural Resources.
Right.
Agreed.
Carrie?
I too suffered from not lowering my hand. I apologize.
Okay, sorry. David?
In just a quick response to Jason's question about other jurisdictions and what they might done. There's a fairly, not fairly, there is a decent piece of research that's been done down at the law school environmental clinic. And they have just recently published a report. And I will bring that up at the end of this when we talk about experts, because they will be able to provide some interesting responses to Jason's question.
Okay. Thank you, David. Sam?
Hello, yeah. I guess I just kind of curious, do we know, or is there data on the, say, a negative impact or any impacts from what we've already described as the known withdrawals from our waterways? Has any of that been recorded? Are we, I guess my concern is, or question is, what type of impacts have resulted from water withdrawals? And I understand that water withdrawals and water flows are based on rain events. They're based on evaporation events through the summer, which create low flow in the rivers and so forth. But I guess if you understand my question, say.
Yeah, I think some of the larger users of the surface waters prior to being more regulated, such as, snowmaking, there were potential impacts that are being documented. A lot of those issues have been addressed, in my opinion, with the conservation flow implementation, so that you keep that base flow in the stream, and water withdrawal can take place when flows are above that. It's, I think, one of the issues, as Carrie said, potentially that we don't know as well is what are like cumulative effects of other water withdrawals that we don't know about, or users that are using water and we just don't know about in a watershed. And we don't have that information per se as an example, but we do know from basically scientific literature what impacts could result as related to decreasing the overall flow in a stream. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so we're going on speculation and scientific data rather than real-time tracking of current withdrawals.
Right, because I think, there's thought to be a number of withdrawals we just don't know about in the state currently.
Okay.
Okay. Representative Dolan?
I hope, and maybe this is more of a topic about future meetings, but water conservation generally, including the end user or the consumer, should be on the table so that we can help to minimize existing stream flows, and that will help to improve the efficiencies of our water use, including being able to maintain adequate in-stream flow. So I wanted to just flag that at some point.
Okay, and I do think one of the charges of the committee is to look at water conservation measures and to discuss that. So that would be a good topic for future meeting. Okay. Any other questions before we move on to just talking about some of the legal framework already existing in Vermont around surface water diversions and withdrawals? Okay, I'll reshare my screen here. Just a second. Okay, so the next topic we wanted to cover was just to discuss a little bit about the existing law and regulations around surface water diversions. I'm gonna have Matt Chapman assist me as I walk through this. So Matt, if you want to add anything after each topic, please feel free.
You know what, Jeff? Why don't you go ahead and go through, and to the extent, I'll either pop in or I can help answer questions at the end.
Okay, that works. So there's a number of existing laws and regulations in Vermont around the use of surface water. One of probably the oldest is the common law riparian rights. In most U.S. state or eastern U.S. has this type of law originating from England, where the West would have, prior appropriation water rights. But the riparian rights gives all landowners, gives all owners of land contiguous to the stream equal rights to reasonable use, but recognizes ownership of the water is held by the public. Vermont is no different. And reasonable use refers to the use of water should not hinder other riparian owners or public use of that water resource. And Title 10 of Vermont State Statute, Chapter 41 is titled The Regulation of Streamflow. The purpose of this chapter is to provide the Department of Environmental Conservation the authority to administer the water conservation policy of the state, which is below, recognizing that's in the public interest that all the waters of the state shall be protected, regulated, and where necessary controlled under the authority of the state. The proper administration of the water resources now and for the future requires careful consideration of the interruption of the natural flow regime in our water courses resulting from the construction of new and operation of existing dams, diversions, and other control structures. And then it goes on to provide the tools to address some of the issues around water withdrawals. Still in Chapter 43, Section 1003, titled the Flow Conference, provides the authority for the department to call a flow conference for an owner of a dam or diversion to address flow alterations that may threaten the public interest. As part of this 1003 flow conference, the department may require actions to address flow alterations or amend permits to include minimum conservation flows. In my experience or knowledge of Vermont, that this has occurred potentially, I think, one time down at Mount Snow many years ago in the mid 80s. The chapter also provides the authority, for the agency to represent the department to represent the agencies in FERC proceedings. These are federal relicensings that require issuance of Section 401 water quality certification. Also contained within Chapter 43 or Chapter 41 is the authority to regulate snowmaking withdrawals. This was a large process in the mid 90s that you know, Jeff Nelson was part of, and many others, to develop rules and procedures that establish a hydraulic conservation flow standard for snowmaking water withdrawals. It establishes, the rules establish a procedure for reviewing water withdrawals and process for public input. They've been in place, you know, since February 1996, and I think, you know, I defer to Jeff on his experience with them, but I think they've worked very well for that sector of.
Yeah, I would agree. If I can just jump in for 1 second,
Yeah.
say, I think that it has been very, you know, useful to have a standard and to balance the need for the water against the need for protecting the streams and their uses. So I think, you know, as folks get up to speed on what may or may not happen for other sectors, it may be worth Jeff at some point spending a little time doing a bit deeper of a dive into you know, how the process works for permitting, reviewing snowmaking water withdrawal proposals.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Jeff. And I can, you know, prior to we do that, send out the snowmaking rules and post that on the the site so people get familiar with that. But yeah, I think the adoption of those rules by both the agency, public, and ski resorts has, you know, brought worked well for that sector over the years.
Not without some cost and disruption, but it's a baseline that everybody understands, and
Yeah.
you know, businesses have been able to adapt and to be able to work within that framework, and I think it's stood the test of time, you know, very successfully, in my opinion.
One of the just moving on here from chapter 41, one of the other rules, regulations that the agency has when it comes to water withdrawals and looking at how water withdrawals affect surface waters is the Vermont water quality standards. Water quality standards, for those that are not familiar, are provisions of the state and federal law. They're approved by the EPA. They describe a condition of a water body and the means by which that condition will be protected or achieved. And they assign these based on different classifications of water. So in Vermont, there's different classes of water depending on its level of what level it is or location it is for each use. We can maybe dive more into that at a future meeting, but they are required by the Federal Clean Water Act, and they require triannual review of the by each state. In Vermont, the Water Quality Standards Review in 97-99 convened a stakeholder process to develop hydrology criteria for Vermont waters that became established in the 2000 revision of the Vermont Water Quality Standards. The hydrology criteria were, you know, developed to effectively implement the water conservation and hydrology policy of the state to address flow alterations and protect aquatic habitat. And that again is, you know, careful consideration of the interruption of the natural flow regime and the use of by sectors in protecting the future use. The water hydrology criteria include 3 areas. First is the Streamflow protection criteria that state that any change from the natural flow regime needs to provide maintenance and flow characteristics to protect aquatic habitat. For this section, the preferred method for determining compliance is a site-specific flow study. But in the absence of a site-specific flow study, the agency has default hydrologic standards for conservation flows that are found within an agency's minimum flow procedure. It also addresses water level fluctuations where in lakes, ponds, impoundments, to make sure those fluctuations are within the realm of protecting aquatic habitat. And lastly, it also deals with the high flow regime, making sure that you're not having flow so high that you are affecting aquatic habitat or the physical structure integrity of a stream. Largely, these are implemented through the issuance of Section 401 water quality certifications when federal licenses or permits are required. Other applicable regulations that have been used for conditioning conservation flows or addressing water withdrawals are the stream alteration rules, where if a intake or diversion structure triggers this section of, or this rule, and a permit is needed, we can include conservation flows. In order to trigger this section, you need to move 10 cubic yards or more, which is pretty large number for some water withdrawals structures that we've seen. The other section that looks at water withdrawals is lake encroachment permits, which are required for intakes of greater than 2 inches in diameter. And then lastly, Act 250 permits, where the agency can recommend conditions to the district to be included that include conservation flows. For inter-basin transfers, there's no existing law or regulation specific to inter-basin transfers in Vermont. There are, however, existing laws and regulations that address some of the environmental concerns that of these water withdrawals. For instance, Vermont water quality standards include conditions for all waters. They have water quality criteria to address temperature and oxygen and other parameters, the hydrology criteria, and the overall management objective and criteria to protect aquatic habitat use is also another provision of the Vermont water quality standards. There's also law around the transport and introduction of aquatic invasive species control in Vermont that prevent the spread of AIS into waters, that can offer some help when reviewing inter-basin transfers. But as I said, there's only been the one permitted inter-basin transfer at Killington Pico snowmaking system. So in summary, Vermont has several existing regulations and rules to protect natural flow regime, stream flow around operations of dams and diversions and water withdrawals. Most of the existing regulations applicable to stream flow and water withdrawals were developed to regulate large projects. I think some of the unknowns that we have currently relate to the smaller water withdrawals that potentially are out there and could have an effect on the overall cumulative effects on the overall surface water resources of the state. So with that, I'll take questions. Matt, I don't know if you want to add. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I would just add maybe two things. One is the water quality standards sort of form a foundation for any program that has an effect on or impacts surface waters in the state of Vermont. So the agency looks to those sort of beyond, even beyond the ones that Jeff mentioned are the most common, but certainly to the extent that people are, say, taking a significant surface water withdrawal for a drinking water source, or are doing other activities that impact or affect surface waters, the standards apply, and potentially the hydrology criteria applies. I think the other thing, and Jeff, correct me if you disagree, but I kind of draw a distinction. Most of the agency's jurisdiction around surface water withdrawals is really focused on the permanence of those or a construction activity. So you're digging, you're doing some earth movement. And I think it really, the thing that the agency has identified both through our investigators and through the Jeff section is that it's these sort of non-permanent sort of hose in the river type withdrawals. I think it's probably inappropriate to say that they're small. I think some of the ones that we've reported have been fairly significant. So, and it's a sort of hole. We have certainly viewed that as a potential hole in the agency's regulatory net with respect to what we can do there. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to jump in and answer questions too.
Yeah, I'd agree, Matt. You know, I think most of the existing regulations envision shovel in the groundwork to regulate that use. And, you know, what we're finding from investigations is that may not be the case all the time. And, you know, we don't have a good tool to regulate that use or permit that use. Senator Bray?
Yeah, this is maybe a question for Matt and Michael Grady, or maybe it's you, Mr. Crocker. I'm just wondering, I know that we talk about waters of the state and being, you know, phrases like held in public trust. And I don't, sometimes that's a little unclear to me in terms of like the legal significance. And is Vermont, by claiming water as being held in public trust, doing something unusual or more protective, or is that the norm elsewhere? And it's just that I didn't know anything about it till getting to the legislature.
So I would say it's the norm. What being held in the public trust means differs. I think there are sort of multiple layers. It's sort of a layered question. Being held in the public trust, sort of in the Western United States, tends to mean that the state has a right to recognize appropriation of water. That's not Eastern sort of common law surrounding water use. Being held in the public trust normally deals more with the use of the water, as far as your ability to access it, fish it, boat it. And then there's also something that basically the state owns the bed and banks of every navigable surface water in the state of Vermont and has the right to basically prohibit or manage people's placement of any structure that would impede upon that navigation. And that's sort of an ancient tenet of the law that goes back into Roman history that's been passed sort of through time and is recognized throughout the United States.
Thank you.
Sam?
No, my hand was not risen.
Okay. Okay, sorry.
Thanks for waking me up, though. Yeah.
Jeff?
Jeff, maybe I missed it. Did you mention in your review a legal framework, Act 250?
Generally, I didn't
Okay.
get into the details of it, Jeff. Just
Okay.
that it is another vehicle. Yeah.
Because the only thing I just wanted to highlight for the group is, under criterion 1E of Act 250, an applicant is required to demonstrate that the activity would maintain the natural condition of the stream. And there's some qualifying language about to the extent feasible or something like that. And so that doesn't rely on, taking a certain amount of material out of the stream or constructing anything. It really has to do with the impact on the stream itself. So there is, there's something already in state law that is not just related to, putting something in or digging something out.
Yeah.
And so I agree with that, Jeff, but it still requires development to be occurring,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so
Right.
It's one of those.
I guess I agree. But once you're in the door, it's a fairly broad inquiry.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. John?
Is that me, Jeff? I couldn't. My
Yeah,
computer's
that's
wobbling,
that's
yeah.
you, John.
Yeah. So jumping off of what Jeff said, I was thinking, I just wanted to make a point. I mean, I agree Act 250 applies. The other programs that you mentioned can intersect with water withdrawals. But, one of the reasons I think we're here is because none of them are targeted that way, except really the snowmaking review is the review that's really targeted on the withdrawal of water. And, I have a lot of experience dealing with Act 250 and all the different programs that you mentioned. And, it was not the norm that, sometimes withdrawal issues could come up, but it depends on what issues were raised before the district commission. And it really isn't focused, on that particular issue. So, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons, why the work that we're going to do is important. One of the reasons we got into this in the first place that came up earlier is the inter-basin transfer issue. And that's just not really covered anywhere, so that's one example of an issue that's not addressed. And I just want to note, and in terms of agricultural withdrawals, they're not regulated through any of those programs, and I think that's one of the issues that we do need to talk about. I think that's just part of our charge, but I think it's important to note that's an activity that can have an impact, and it's not covered by any of those existing laws. And at some point, I think we should talk about the groundwater issue came up earlier, and Jeff Nelson was involved with this issue, and David Dean was a number of years ago. But we did create a program for large groundwater withdrawals that I think could be instructive in that it's a lot of the same. It was a similar sort of effort to say, well, where's the gaps in the regulation, and how do we target protections at the state level, for resources, that balance the different uses in the way that the snowmaking rules ultimately do that as the one targeted program for surface water. So I just wanted to note kind of that's not a question, this is my comment, based on kind of jumping off on kind of legally where we're at.
Okay, thanks, John. Representative Dolan?
Thank you. I too want to build on some of this conversation to flag and mention with respect to this topic on policy that both in the water quality standards, in the definitions, as well as Act 138 passed as a follow-up to our recovery from Tropical Storm Irene, where the management of our stream processes to achieve or to work towards equilibrium condition was critically important if we're to maintain a flood resilience as an important goal for us over time. And I wanted to just make sure that that's flagged as part of this policy discussion.
Thank you. Brian?
Thanks, Jeff. Just question with regards to de minimis water withdrawals. When a withdrawal from surface water falls below that, I don't believe it requires a permit from Agency of Natural Resources, DEC. But if a water user is going to draw above that, I'm thinking about agriculture. they absolutely, my understanding is they have to connect with DEC on if they want to, conduct that activity. So I imagine we'll be talking about specific sectors and how the regulations that you just framed apply to them. But based on my communications with farmers, if they're considering significant withdrawals, they absolutely have to check in with DEC, is my understanding.
Yeah, they typically have reached out when they have de minimis or have withdrawals. Right now, there is no permit for just a water withdrawal. So there is, typically authorization, review and authorization if it's done in X, Y, and Z, that you will meet the hydrology criteria and protect, aquatic habitat. So that's the way it's been handled in the currently.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions? Hearing none.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes.
Jeff Nelson here. Would it be possible to take a very short, less than 5-minute break before we move into the final section of today's meeting?
Certainly. Yeah.
Okay. So reconvene at 11. Is that okay with everyone?
That works for me.
Sure.
So
Okay.
we'll
Great.
meet back here at 11.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Jeff, can you still hear me? This is Chris. Hey, Sam, this is Chris. Is that like a B-25 flying over you in the background there?
Oh, actually, I think it's I was going to call it a C-130, but it's only a 2-engine.
Uh-huh.
A few years ago, we did a project at the Rutland Airport on an expansion to the runway, and we put in
Oh, sure.
a crash containment system called an EMAS system. And in order to do it, we had to build like a block.
Sure. Along that north end.
No, on the south end.
Oh, on the south end. Okay.
Yeah, they did it to the south end. And so the wall is about 750 feet long, about 70 feet tall. And it's split up in half. So about half of it goes up and then it sets back 40 feet. And that was necessary to backfill and create enough surface. So it was kind of cool while we were working there. There was a few touch and goes from different military operations, which is kind of cool. So we happened to capture that picture. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, it's definitely, I said, that's a big plane, whatever it is,
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Were you a military guy, Chris?
No, but my brother was a pilot for Air Guard. He flew F-16s.
Okay.
And my father and uncle. So I never got a joyride. I said, "Can I get a ride in the back seat of one of those F-16s sometime?"
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Good luck.
Yeah. My son-in-law is in the Air Force, and he's in the cockpit of a F-15, the Strike Eagles. And when he came, and they were based out of, I think there's only 3 bases in the world that host it. And he was in North Carolina. And when he proposed, he actually did it formally or traditionally. He asked for my daughter's hand in marriage. And I said, well, the only thing is you got to do a buzz over my house at one point. And being a Norwich grad, he was pretty close to doing it last year. They were going to send like 4 of them up to do a flyover Norwich, but a new commander got in place and everybody cut their budgets. So he didn't quite make it.
Yeah.
But I kind of follow a lot of their activity. Yeah.
My brother decided to surprise my parents on their anniversary party in the backyard by doing a low pass.
Yeah.
At that point, it was an EB-57, and I don't think it was a joyous occasion for the town because it scared the hell out of a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, where we live up in the mountains in the eastern side of the Taconic mountain range down here in northern Rutland County. And we are right in the flight pattern of their training exercises. So back when the F-16s were around, they did a lot of low-level exercises. But with these F-22s, they're a higher altitude aircraft, I understand. But we still get the occasional C-17s out of, I think, Massachusetts that do low flyovers our house. So yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Jeff, sorry, we're chatting away using committee time. I just wanted, I have to leave I have another meeting to go to, so I'll have to step out at about 11:20. So,
okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, no problem. Hopefully we can kind of move through the next section, at least try to get this schedule worked out before you leave.
I think if and just in general, probably true for Representative Dolan and myself, during the balance of the session, which isn't too much longer, I don't know, maybe mid-May, maybe less, maybe more. Monday is our one and only day generally for a meeting.
Okay. My thought was maybe we don't meet until mid-May. And then meet every month after that. So that was what I was going to propose, knowing that Representative Dolan and your schedule are going to be pretty tight between now and the end of session.
Right. Thank you.
I think we're waiting for a few more people here, but maybe we'll just get started, knowing that everybody has to leave. Number 5, committee goals, deliverables, and schedule. So we can revisit the act as passed. I can share my screen. A second. Close this. Not showing up. Technical difficulties here. Well, for some reason, I'm not able.
Is Michael O'Grady still with us?
I don't think he is. No. I don't know if people. I'm having problems sharing it for some reason. It keeps crashing. The Act 173 as passed. But I can review the duties if you want to pull it open. There's 6 main duties of this group. First one is to develop a baseline inventory of the current and projected quantities, locations, and usage of diversion and transfers of surface water in Vermont. Recommend whether or not surface water transfers between watersheds should occur. Identify whether the state of Vermont should develop and implement a statewide permitting or regulatory regime for diversions or other transfers of surface water, including the scale or size of the watershed subject to regulation, how a permitting program would comply with the Vermont water quality standards, how or if a permitting program should address the impacts of diversions on groundwater, and how to address reducing demand for water through water recycling, reuse, and efficiency measures. 4, analyze potential viable regimes to address the use of surface waters in Vermont. 5, if necessary, propose legislative changes to implement the recommendations of the study group. And 6, if necessary, identify any water quality rules, policies, procedures that may require updating to implement the recommendations of the study group. So what I'd like to do is try to set a schedule for us to meet and develop some future agenda topics around these deliverables. We've been discussing some of those, and I've been writing them down as we've discussed them. But maybe the first thing is the schedule for this committee to meet. My proposal, knowing that Senator Bray and Representative Dolan will be busy right up to the end of the session, which typically I hopefully be around mid-May or so, is that we meet in May, and then we meet every other month after that for at least 6 meetings. So that would take us to October, November timeframe, where we would hopefully by that time be working on reports and drafts to the legislature. So that's what I propose. Carrie?
Did you mean meet every month, beginning in May, or every other month?
Every month. So it'd be a meeting in May, June, July, August, September, October.
I was confused about that too.
Sorry.
That makes sense to me as far as the schedule. I think that's a good time frame, and it seems like we ought to be able to complete what we need to do. And with that,
okay. I've taken notes on some of the future meeting topics. But maybe I can send out some ideas to the group and we can flush those out more. Maybe focusing obviously first on the May one, what we want to accomplish at that meeting, what topics we may want. And we can work through those and I can set up a schedule as going forward here and some agendas. One of the other areas that I want to ask the committees for input on is compiling a list of experts we wanted to bring in to speak on different topics. I don't know if you want to just provide those to me by email, if we want to talk about different topics right now of what we're thinking and potential people to include. Yeah, Jeff?
I guess the one thing, and you sort of touched on it in response to a question earlier, is getting, if there's someone associated with a regulatory program in one of the other northeastern states that has some experience in implementing any kind of similar program. I don't know. I thought I saw something related to Massachusetts having some kind of program relating to regulation of water withdrawals. It might be good to, if there's a person from that program or one from another state that can speak to how they've done business, how it's worked, and some of the challenges and pitfalls. I could see that being useful for this group to hear.
Certainly, and Massachusetts does have I believe, a water withdrawal permitting program. I can reach out and see if I can find a contact there.
Great.
David?
Yeah, I want to go back to my comments earlier, and I would like to invite the environmental center at the law school, because in fact, they have done a broad survey of jurisdictions that have addressed this issue and done it in various ways. And I think prior to selecting a jurisdiction, that maybe we ought to have some discussion about how different jurisdictions have looked at this issue, where they've come from, what was their relationship to this whole question of the state owning the public trust, and how is Vermont law structured relative to using that public trust. And I know that they have done a fair amount of work, and just to be upfront, that I have been part of that effort. And I am quite impressed with what they have brought forward. So prior to selecting a jurisdiction that we want to hear from and invest their time and our time. I think that the survey work that they did would be helpful. And then tying it to the legal questions of Vermont's riparian law, common law, I think would be helpful for us too. So I'm going to sort of suggest that they be up front with us in May.
All right, and do you want to reach out to that group, David, and I can get a date and
one of the yes, the answer is yes, and they'll be in touch.
Okay. Jason?
Yeah, I guess my question is would we ever consider branching out of New England to maybe some regulatory examples in the Midwest where agriculture, snowmaking, hydroelectric, big farms, little farms, multiple users, lots of diversion from one surface water that, the ditch system out there is extremely utilized. Not that it's entirely apples to apples, but more so in an area where the impacts to the watershed, the impacts to the trout, fish populations, and a lot of the same industries in an area where the water is of higher or much more dire need. So it's the process is probably way far to one side as it would apply to Vermont, but I think from a perspective standpoint on how that impacted not only the environment but the industries and how that rolls out and how it's being implemented today may be useful just to antiquate ourselves with a regulatory process in which it's probably going to undergoes far more scrutiny and permitting than would maybe be applicable in Vermont, just to see how that works.
Yeah, David, do you know? I mean, I'm not familiar with how those regulatory processes work out there. I don't know if the Vermont laws. Okay.
There are, in fact, Midwestern states, not the far Western states, Jason, but the Midwestern states.
Yeah, I just caution to make sure when we're looking at those states to, we're getting to a point where you have that border, which is usually the Mississippi, between riparian rights states and water appropriation, or, so just to make sure we're apples to apples. But
yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't suggest that you could take what you do in Wyoming and Colorado and apply it to Vermont. That's certainly not practical. Yeah. But maybe there are some strategies and certainly maybe just some data which would be helpful to use as a resource. Not necessarily. I think I fully agree. The law and legal side of things is very different in Colorado and Wyoming and Utah and Idaho than it is here, but a lot of the same industry practices, and certainly I got to imagine a ton of data and observation and monitoring may be helpful in just understanding specifically as it applies to, I think, really the three big, if you take power plants out, the three big industries, snowmaking, agriculture, and drinking water are certainly applicable in our state as they are theirs. It just may be worthy as a perspective.
Okay. Yep. Ryan?
Great, thanks. I brought this up a little bit in my comments, but a review of some of the reports that have been prepared by the U.S. Geological Survey with regards to estimates of Vermont's water usage for both groundwater and surface water withdrawals, understanding gaps that may exist in those estimates or how it could inform the work of this group, I think could be useful to perhaps have more of a granular breakdown of some of the, generic results of some of the reports that are shared on their report websites would be my recommendation at this time.
Okay. Thank you.
So are we going to pick a particular day in those months so that we can get it on our calendar now? Sorry, my mind just jumped around because I turned the paper over and it said schedule.
Yeah, well, so I would like to, have it a set date going forward, understanding though that Senator Bray and Representatives Dolan may still may need to meet on a Monday, which maybe we can just set the schedule, meet on Monday for the remainder, if that works with people.
Monday morning doesn't work great for me always. I have these standing meetings that I can miss sometimes, but if we could avoid, I can meet I'm free later in the afternoon on Mondays, or but I just wanted to note that.
Okay. Carrie, you have your hand up.
I did. Mondays, as I appreciate your accommodating. So anytime Monday, except for that, I do have a standing meeting at 11:30. I do want to also mention that Massachusetts is a little more complicated than we think, where they've paved over their largest aquifer. And so they've run rivers dry, and now they're ripping up pavement to do recharge. They're also pumping water out of one basin for drinking water, and their wastewater is diverted to another basin. So know that it gets a little bit more complicated than just looking at their current policies with respect to diversion. So I just wanted to flag that.
Yeah.
I think it's also good to sort of set the stage on climate. I think we all agree that with the combination of drought and flood, I do go to the extremes, but that's what we're talking about and planning for. And it would be important, I think, whatever document we produce is set in that context of trying to make our society, our state more resilient to those sorts of impacts and still support the industries, the uses, and the stream health or water resources health. And then in terms of other examples, I know there are other countries that are struggling with this same issue as well, and have been very creative at looking at what those conservation flows need to be, and then look at what's remaining to help support the demands. And again, water conservation across the board needs to be part of our solution. So I just wanted to kind of mention, if we are talking about additional ideas or experts, those are some of the issues I wanted to raise. I'd be happy to send you some ideas. It'd be great, again, to have a website so that we can see what everyone else's ideas are for experts to come in.
Okay. Yeah, and I will get that site set up. Senator Bray?
Yeah. So thanks so much for today. I have to sign off now. Look forward. I'll watch email for notification of the next meeting and the website and all the rest. So thanks very much, Jeff, for getting this up and running so well. Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.
Quickly, Chris, I'm about to bring up a question relative to Legislative Council and making these meetings available on the legislative website, just so you can think about it.
Great. Okay. Thanks. More transparency is always better. Thank you.
Yeah, Carrie, I think you've raised some good points there. And, maybe as David was saying, after we hear from the law clinic, we can think about, what state regulator or who we may want to invite in and have a better understanding of what the issues are in each of the states that they looked at, and then maybe discuss as a committee of where it makes sense to invite speakers in from maybe different states. Thank you. Evan?
Yeah, hi. I guess this is my first time on one of these committees, so I don't know if it's typical for ANR to have its own experts come and address the committee, but it seems to me an aquatic biologist would be, input from an aquatic biologist would be a really important just piece of background to hear, since it seems to me a lot of this sort of concern stems from that, to better help the group better understand the targets that have been put in place and how those relate to aquatic biota.
Okay.
And whether that's, from in the agency itself or an outside expert, just not sure it matters.
Right. Any other ideas, or I mean, I can start, maybe working with David to get the law school on for the next one, our next meeting. Maybe it may be good to hear from, maybe an aquatic biologist as well early in the process. So maybe we can look at those two for our next May meeting in May. Jeff?
One other thought, as we went through the responsibilities of this group, the very first one was to develop the inventory. And I guess I would just suggest that before we get too far along, that we hear from someone that is going to be presenting, and maybe we've heard some of that today already. Maybe there's not much more to say. I don't know. But I guess I just want to, make sure that we don't lose sight of that as the very first thing that's listed before we start getting too far afield with other, kind of other tasks.
No, that's a good point. And yeah, I can maybe break down the inventory of what we currently know, and share that with the group via our website and our online tool that's been developed. And
some of this is going to be difficult because obviously it says inventory of current and projected quantity. So what is the projected quantity? I don't know.
Right. I don't know either. No. Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I think to tie into Jeff's point, I think before you can even establish an inventory, we would have to review a threshold, because to Carrie's point, one snowmaking industry may be the equivalent of 100 small users, so to speak. So I guess it can't be, to me, that's where I think, to Jeff's point, we really have to sort of focus on is what surface waters are we considering this applicable to, and whether it's a withdrawal of 1,000 gallons a day, or cumulative over a year, or a withdrawal of 50,000 gallons a day, cumulative equivalent to the prior over the year. I mean, that's where I think we really have to sort of focus on the eligibility or regulation component to who this applies to before we can even take an accurate inventory. Because right now anybody can stick a pump in their stream and pump it to their camp or pump it to a pond, and we probably have no idea who they are or that they're doing it. But we obviously know that the big users are this is going to apply to them. So I think understanding the sort of eligibility to which these regulations may apply to particular activities would be beneficial to establish.
Okay. David?
Yeah, and I would just bet that of all of us that are on this call, each one of us would have a different size pipe that we would consider important.
Right.
My pipe is really, really small. What I wanted to say is that eventually we will be talking to other jurisdictions who have trod this ground before us. And I think that might be instructive. And along with an aquatic biologist, because I hadn't really thought in depth about the issue of return. Maybe Jason, you have some expertise or knowledge of people who can help compute that, or give us a sense of what that value is relative to a withdrawal from the same watershed. And then I'm just going to take this time because we're out of time, actually. I appreciate the Agency of Natural Resources hosting this meeting and whatever. And I'm sorry Chris has left, but Representative Dolan, this is a legislative committee. And as you know, I am not, I am a legislative mindset. And I think that people should be able to find this information and participate in, not participate, but at least witness these meetings in real time, the way you guys in the legislature manage your committee meetings. And so and again, we can continue to meet through the administration, but people who have followed this in the legislative forum are going to look there to see what might come out. So maybe you can, that's why I'm sorry Michael's not here. Maybe someone can talk to Legislative Council IT about getting a real-time link onto the legislative webpage.
Yes, I'd be happy to raise that with
Okay.
Mike, and I'll talk with Jeff as well as Chris, to make sure we're using one channel there.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Carrie. John?
I have to go.
Really quick, because I know.
Okay. All right. Thanks,
I
Carrie.
know we're out of time, but my strong recommendation would be, let's start these are all good points. I think everything that people want to look into, I want to look into as well. But I think we should start kind of, the 30,000 foot, that's why I really support what David is saying. Let's get kind of like what is the law that kind of governs this, and if the law school's kind of done this broader look at it, and then we could kind of funnel into, what do we want to do and answer to these specific questions, because they're all good questions, but I just, that's how I would recommend that we start. We'll get to all this. We have 6 meetings, but kind of knowing where we want to go, what the options are, and then build, if we're going to have a program, then build it and answer all these questions.
Okay, thanks, John. Ryan?
Yeah, to David Dean, your point, I absolutely agree with cross-posting this as much as possible, making sure this is publicly available and publicly noticed. The act, as I read it, assigns a Secretary of Natural Resources. So I don't know if it's technically a legislative study committee. It definitely is a study group. But I don't know if there's any issues with getting it posted on a legislative website. I absolutely support that if possible. But just being pedantic and looking at how this group was commissioned, but absolutely agree with messaging this as widely as possible, so all stakeholders can listen and participate in this process.
Yeah, and I think the agency agrees with that as well, David. And we can figure out how best to make sure this is publicly available, transparent, and viewable to interested parties.
Thank you.
Jeff?
I guess the only question I have, and what I heard David asking for, was to have this be sort of, for lack of a better term, streamed real time, and have people be able to be part of this. I mean, I guess I'm not sure that that makes sense if people are going to be, I mean, is this a public meeting where anybody can come and anybody can
No.
participate? This is a meeting
Don't
of this
misunderstand
committee.
me, Jeff. This would be just, I have a legislative committee meeting in my mind. But people are there in real time. They don't have to look at a YouTube video later to see what went on, that they can be there. But I'm not looking for, off the wall participation. We've got a lot of work to do.
Right.
We're not
That's my
going to be able
concern.
to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if we have all sorts of people that show up and have, want to dominate the meeting, either asking questions or, raising points, then that means it's going to be hard for us to do our work.
Yeah.
Jeff, you've seen me in committee often enough to know that's not going to happen.
I believe that.
To happen.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to understand. So thank you.
Okay, well, we are basically out of time. One last thing I wanted to raise with the group, and maybe just not, we need to discuss fully here, but just keep in the back of our minds is if, as this goes forward, a need for a designated facilitator, moderator for a meeting, for our meetings. It's just a point that I wanted to raise. I don't think we need to answer this question today, but as things move down the line, I think, as written, the agency designee or me as the facilitator and moderator. But at the same time, I have my own, or the agency has probably its own views and want to make sure that there's a neutral person if needed for all parties. But just wanted to raise that point, not that it needs to be answered today, but just to have that on the committee's mind.
Make sure it's on the next agenda, if you will.
I will. Yep.
Thanks.
Okay. And thank you all. That's all I have for today. I'll be in touch with a meeting invite for May. I don't know if we picked a date, but I'll try to put it on Monday in May later. I know some people's availabilities in the afternoon. I saw someone had a 3 to 5 conflict, but we'll do our best to get these scheduled and get agendas and speakers in place. So thank you all for your time and look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Jeff.
So
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.